Okay, so first of all, before we start our class for today, wish you all a very happy new year. I hope 2021 is a good year for us, very much better than 2020, and may all your dreams and goals come true this year. Okay, so with that, we'll start off what we left for from our last class. So last class, we were studying about the fundamentals of financial markets. Remember, this is the last chapter or the last lesson we have with a more of a theoretical background. So there we went through what interest rates are, the significance of what an interest rate does in financial markets, then the two basic types, the nominal interest rate and the real interest rate, and what is the difference between these two interest rates. What is it? It's the inflation that causes this difference. And then we also did a small calculation based on this formula over here. It's highlighted. Let's see whether I can, yes, here. So this is the Fisher's equation. Based on that, we did a small calculation on how to arrive at the real interest rate. And I also introduced you to a simpler method. This is a approximation only. So if you had done a MCQ question, or if you had detailedly done the Fisher equation and just want to double check your answer, you could use this particular equation for you to recheck your answer. All right. And then we went through the ways in which interest rate is calculated. So we saw there were two ways, simple and compound, and how these two were different. So on a compound interest rate, you get a interest on interest as well, whereas that situation doesn't occur in simple interest rate. And then this particular formula is the formula for compound interest rate. And then we moved into to study how this interest rate is determined. We saw that price of a particular product is determined by demand and supply. Just like that, interest rate, which is the price of money or price of funds, how is this interest rate determined? Or in other words, we looked at demand of what and supply of what decided the interest rate. So there were two theories which showed us this on how this interest rate was determined. One is the loanable funds theory, and the other is the liquidity preference theory. So before we finished our last lesson before Christmas, we were going through the loanable funds theory. So according to the loanable funds theory, interest rate is decided by the supply and demand of loanable funds available in the economy. Okay, it was this element or loanable funds demand or supply is what determine the equilibrium interest rate as per the loanable funds theory. Remember that. Okay, so we in detail looked into what are the sources of demand of loanable funds and what are the sources of supply of loanable funds. The main source for demand comes from investment. The main source of supply comes from savings. But we know the parties who operate in an economy. So we saw the different ways in which this demand could come. So that is what we have elaborated over here. Okay. And always remember, demand for loanable funds is downward sloping and supply for loanable funds is upward sloping. Why? When the interest rate is high, the amount you demand as credit is always low. When the interest rate is low, the demand of loanable funds is higher. Just like that, think about the supply end. Now here, as a supplier, you are lending funds. So when the interest rate is high, you're ready to lend more funds. But when the interest rate is low, you are not willing to give a higher amount of funds to be lent as loanable funds. You are ready to give a smaller portion of it. Why? The return that you receive is very low. Okay, so based on that, we arrived at this diagram where we saw a upward sloping supply curve and a downward sloping demand curve determining the equilibrium interest rate. Okay, and then we saw if the market interest rate is higher than the equilibrium interest rate. Okay, if it's over in this area, what happens? There is low demand, high supply, causing a excess supply situation. In other words, imagine an excess supply of funds. So excess supply of funds meaning it's a surplus of funds available in the economy, meaning there is a high liquidity of funds. There's so much of funds available to be lent, but people are demanding very low. They're demanding low amount of loans. Okay. What happens if the market interest rate is below the equilibrium rate? So over here, we are looking at a low supply, but a high demand. This is a deficit in the market. People want more funds as loanable funds, but the supply is limited. So there is a shortage in the market. So whenever there is a shortage, slowly the market itself corrects it, because high demand meaning whenever the demand is higher, the suppliers to bridge the gap will increase the interest rate. So here ideally the banks who source the savings and have the savings with them will increase the interest rate so it reaches an equilibrium state. Similarly, when there is excess in the market, what happens? The suppliers, who are the banks, they see a high level of supply. They are ready to give more funds, but people are willing to get only less. So they will have to reduce the interest rate to induce more demand for loans. So just like that, they would reduce the interest rate so as to it reaches the equilibrium state. So both these forces are at equilibrium. Okay. If there is a situation where you have to draw this diagram, remember the axis, because so many students, they know the theory, they know the diagram, but they forget what's on the y-axis and what's on the x-axis. Y-axis is rate of interest for both loanable funds theory and liquidity preference theory. But it is the x-axis that differs. Here we are looking at quantity of loanable funds. Okay, I hope that's clear. So with that, we are moving to the other theory, which is the liquidity preference theory. Okay. So liquidity preference theory was developed by Keynes. Keynes is a very famous economist. So how this word got coined is that liquidity preference, meaning a person's preference to hold wealth in the form of money balances rather than having assets. Like imagine a situation where instead of myself having 50,000 rupees in cash in my own wallet or in my own purse, I keep it, I invest in a fixed deposit. So instead of putting in a fixed deposit, my preference is to keep that 50,000 in my wallet or in my purse. That is a practical way of looking at this term called liquidity preference. It essentially means preference for holding financial wealth in the form of money balances. So what is this money balances? It is the currency or cash readily available rather than having long-term illiquid assets. Okay. So according to this liquidity preference theory, it says interest rate is determined by the supply and demand for money. Simply, money itself determines the interest rate. Okay, so supply of money is controlled by the monetary policy tools available to the central bank, and money demand depends on the motivation of the individuals to hold money balance in the form of cash and currency without regard for the lost interest income. Remember that. You're ready to keep that 50,000, or just imagine your entire salary. You're willing to keep it as notes and coins in your purse with you or in your hand with you, rather than putting it at an interest earning asset. That's what you call as demand for money. So here the diagram is quite different. The diagram, you can see the y-axis is interest rate, no change in that. But here on the x-axis, we are looking at quantity or the volume of money in the economy. So note the difference on the x-axis. So the x-axis will tell you the critical variable between these two theories. And money supply is a straight vertical line which indicates that irrespective of any interest rate changes, money supply doesn't change. You may wonder why that is. Now remember, here we saw money supply is controlled by the monetary policy tools available to the central bank. So money supply is something the central bank uses to adjust the interest rate the way they want. So it's under the control of central bank. All right. So just because there is a change in interest rate, it doesn't result in a change in money supply. That's why it's a direct vertical line. I hope I'm clear to you. Look at the impact as money supply causing the impact on interest rate. Let's see whether I can get a clear picture of this. So over here, this particular, we are talking about money supply, on why it's being a straight line. What I'm telling you is because money supply is controlled by the central bank, money supply causes the change on interest rate. Just because interest rate changes, it doesn't create an impact on money supply. All right. A change in I doesn't cause a change in MS. It's the change in MS that causes a change in I. All right. So as per the diagram, irrespective of interest rate being at 5, interest rate being at 10, or interest rate being at 12, money supply doesn't change. If the central bank decides to increase the money supply, then yes, money supply will increase, causing the interest rate to come down. Okay, that is the reason it is a vertical line. But money demand, as all the other demand curves, is a downward sloping line, and we will see why. Money demand has three reasons why people demand money. So if you have done economics, I'm sure that you would have come across these three reasons. First is transaction motive. Next, you have precautionary motive. And third, you have speculative motive. Now, what's special about these two motives, transactionary and precautionary, is that these two depend on your level of income. Now, what is transaction motive? For your day-to-day transaction, you need to have money balances with you in hand. Okay, so that depends on your income. Assume one of you earn 50,000 and the other earns 20,000. Okay, so your day-to-day expenses are going to be depending on your income. A 50,000 earning person is comfortable to spend 20,000 on their day-to-day transaction. But a 20,000 earning person is only willing to spend 10,000 or 5,000 on their day-to-day transaction. So the amount you're willing to have as money balances for transaction purposes depends on your income. So if your income increases, you are willing to hold more money for transaction purpose. If I'm drawing it over here, income is denoted as Y, or let's say income. If income increases, yes, then money demand for transaction purposes will increase. So if the 20,000 earning person, he get a salary increment and salary is now increased to 30. He's now early he spent 5,000 on daily expenses for let's assume for the entire month. So that 5,000 now, because he's getting additional 10, he's now willing to increase to 10,000. Okay, that's what we are referring to. Nowhere here am I mentioning about an interest rate. So remember that. Second one we are looking at is precautionary motive. This is money that you hold for a contingency purpose. Now, younger crowd who are still dependent on your parents might not be aware of it, but yes, you hold cash for your day-to-day expenses, for day-to-day traveling. But if you are very independent and managing your own finances, you will keep an additional amount of money for some contingency purpose. What if there is some medical requirement and you need to pay by cash? What if there is some repair in the house all of a sudden and I don't have money to pay for it? So for a precautionary purpose, you will hold some money. All right. This is also going to depend on your income. Why? If your income is not adequate to meet that motive, you're not going to have adequate cash balances. Simple as that. Again, we are going to look at the same example. 50,000 earning individual and a 20,000 earning individual. So 50,000 earning individual is willing to have 10,000 for transaction purpose and would say, okay, I'm willing to have 20,000 additional for precautionary motive in case there's a medical emergency, in case there is any repair or there is any accidents, I need to have some money additionally. Okay, but the 20,000 earning person has 5,000 for transaction purpose and would say, okay, I can keep additional 10,000 maybe for precautionary motive, but that's also challenging. Maybe something around 8 to 10,000 they're willing to have additionally for any unforeseen needs. All right. So again, these two is going to depend on your income. But the third one is a very different reason. Here you are going to look at the speculative motive of an individual. Now think of yourself. If you are the person earning 50,000, you have 10,000 for transaction, 20,000 for precautionary. Now you have additional 20,000 with you, which is a saving. Okay. Now that saving you want to put in an investment. You want to earn interest out of it. Okay. So for you to hold that 20,000 in the form of money balances is going to depend on your interest rate. Why? Assume or imagine, in other words, that you have that 20,000, it's your saving, and the market interest rate is 4% or 3%. Not very lucrative for you to keep the, actually go and put a fixed deposit for that rate. So you say might as well hold it as cash balances. But assume the interest rate move from 3% to 13%. Now you are wondering, okay, why should I have 20,000 as just idling as cash? I can earn 13% elsewhere. So might as well invest. So speculative motive is depending on your interest rate. If the interest rate is increasing, the money demanded for speculative purpose is going to decline. That's going to have an inverse relationship. All the others had a proportionate relationship. So when income increases, money demand for transaction motive increased. Money demand for precautionary motive also increased. But now I'm talking about interest rate and money demand for speculative purposes. When interest rate is increasing, you're not going to have money in the form of cash balances with you. Why? Your opportunity cost is very high. If you keep that money balances, you're going to lose 13%, which you could have earned as interest income. Okay, so when interest rate increases, you're not going to hold more money as cash balances, you're going to hold less money as cash balances. So your money demand will decrease. Understand that relationship. Okay, so equilibrium interest rate is therefore determined by the supply and demand for the most liquid asset in the economy, which is money. So there you can see money supply and money demand being downward sloping, indicating the inverse relationship, and the intersection point is the equilibrium situation. All right. If we are moving here, so increase, let's say if the money supply is increasing, increase of money supply, money supply will move to the right hand side. Now that will cause interest rate, which was at this level, to come down to a low level. When there is more money in the economy, interest rate will come down. Okay. Let's see for a decrease in money supply. The shift will be towards your left. When the money supply is decreasing, now your interest rate has increased. Okay. Now we are going to see an increase in money demand. Increase in money demand. Again, the curve will move upwards, causing the interest rate to increase. When there is a decrease in money demand, curve will move downwards, causing the interest rate to decrease. Okay, just for your knowledge purpose. So that is the two theories which showed you how interest rate is determined. Now remember, this interest rate that we say that it was determined by the forces is the nominal interest rate that we are talking about. All right, the market deciding interest rate. So after that, we are going to address another question. What is that question? Why do different securities have different interest rate? Yes, we saw that demand and supply decided the interest rate. But in practical scenario, we see different securities having different interest rate. And in this section of the lesson, we are going to focus on why these different assets have different interest rate. So this can be split into two reasons or two ways of looking at it. One is you can see that securities with the same maturity time but still have different interest rate. Okay, so you can see a treasury bond and a debenture both for 5 years period. Okay, but the interest rate is very drastic. The gap is very drastic. We are going to see why is that difference existing. And another is, yes, this is the same security issued by the same person, same kind of characteristics, but it has different interest rates. Let me show it to you. Now, if you are going to, let's go to the central bank site. So here you can see this is a debenture that we are talking about. So this debenture was issued last year, December. Sorry, not last year anymore. Year before last, 2019. So let's see the interest rate available. You can see a 5-year debenture for this issued by this particular entity is priced at a fixed 14.5. All right. One of your mic is unmute. Let's. Okay, there is some noise disturbance coming in. Let's see. So you can see a 5-year instrument last year had an average interest, a treasury bond issued by the government for 5-year period had a interest rate of about 9.87. All right. But a debenture which is also issued for 5 years had a 14.5%. So there itself you can see a difference in interest rate. Okay. And what's even funny is, now this is a treasury bond. Now there is a difference in interest rate between a 5-year treasury bond and a 10-year treasury bond. But both of these are treasury bonds. Why is this difference? That is what we are going to look at the moment. Okay. So first one we are going to look at is the risk structure of interest rate. This is going to explain to you why even though securities have the same maturity, they have different interest rates. So our example, 5-year treasury bond, which is at 9.87, has a different interest rate than a 5-year debenture, which is priced at 14.5. You can see the spread somewhere closer to 5%. Okay. And next we will see why even though securities have same characteristics. So earlier, same treasury bonds, but they have different interest rates. That is going to be explained using term structure. So here the keyword is term, the differing maturity. Okay, so let's get into the topic. Risk structure of interest rate. This theory or this concept is going to explain to you why even though securities with the same terms to maturity have different interest rate. If you can please note it over here, treasury bond with 9.87% versus a debenture which is at 14.5, both at 5 years maturity. Okay. The reason being differing risk, liquidity and information cost. Now, according to this concept, it says, look here, the difference between these two products interest rate is that there is a difference in risk level, difference in liquidity level, difference in the information cost. Okay, because of those, one is having a higher interest rate than the other. Now, we know interest rate can be broken down into two major categories. One is the risk-free rate and the risk premium. So, what we are saying is interest rate includes two components. One is risk-free rate. Other one is the risk premium. Now, risk-free rate is you have no, the name itself suggests there is no risk involved, but you give an interest rate, you give an interest or adequate compensation to the security. But risk premium is the compensation that you give for the additional risk that you take on. Now, this risk premium, which is the incremental interest rate demanded by investor or a lender to take in a higher risk level compared to a government security. Now, you know, a government security or government issued security has no default risk. Your amount is secured. You will get your return back. So you have no worry after you deposit the money. But if you are going to a non-government issued security, you are worried whether your money, the principal and the interest is going to come back. You're going to get you're exposed to a higher risk than the government security. So for you to take on that additional risk, the incremental return is what is indicated by the risk premium. Now, this risk premium depends on certain factors. One is the credit risk, other is the liquidity risk, and the last one is the maturity risk. Now, when we are talking about risk structure of interest rate, we are not going to worry about maturity risk. Why? Both the instruments or the securities that we are going to talk about have the same terms to maturity. So that is why maturity risk here is not looked at. You don't have to consider that in this concept. But these two are some main reasons that's causing this difference. Let's see them in detail. First one is the default risk. Default risk is the probability that the borrower will not pay in full the promised interest, the principal, or both. Higher the default risk, higher the risk premium, and therefore a higher interest rate is demanded. Next, you have liquidity. We know this concept. An instrument with higher liquidity is more desirable to investors who will be willing to accept a lower rate of return. Thus, a less liquid asset called an illiquid asset, you have to pay a higher yield to attract the investors in order for them to sacrifice this thing called liquidity. We studied what is liquidity, ability for you to convert your asset into cash in a least cost and least time. So when there is a widely available market, you could easily sell or get rid of your instrument at the market value with the less transaction cost. Illiquid asset is the asset which you are unable to do that. You can't sell at the market price at a reasonable time and at a reasonable and at a low transaction cost. If you can't do that, it's an illiquid asset. Okay, so if you are going to sell an illiquid asset, you have to give that buyer, the buyer who's willing to sacrifice the liquidity, some compensation. Am I correct? He's going to sacrifice the ability to sell this quickly in the market. Therefore, you have to give a higher interest rate so that the buyer, here we are looking at the investor, is compensated for that. Okay. Last one is information cost. Information cost increase if the borrowers are not well known and research needs to be conducted before potential lenders are willing to buy securities issued by such borrowers. Gathering information requires resources and therefore reduces the expected rate on a financial asset. Now we are going to see these three reasons with our example. Okay. So we looked at two assets. We had a 5-year T-bond and we had a 5-year debenture. $9.87, 14.5%. Now, if we are talking about default risk, treasury bond issued by the government, you consider it as risk-free. There is no any credit risk. But here we are looking at a 5-year debenture issued by a non-government entity. Okay, let's add this other word called unlisted as well for our preference, for easiness. This is an unlisted debenture. I will explain it to you when we move to liquidity. Okay, now let's assume this is issued by a company called X. So X company doesn't have ability to print money, right? So they have to earn an income, and from that income is what they have to pay the interest for this debenture. Okay, so if there is a possibility that they are unable to pay it, X company can be of a higher credit rating or a lower credit rating, but there is always some level of a credit risk for them. Okay, so this is available. High credit risk. Now let's move into liquidity. A treasury bond, widely acceptable security. There is a secondary market available for you to sell and get your money back. So on a liquidity level, the liquidity risk for a T-bond is very, very minimal. But debenture here that we are talking about is an unlisted debenture. Okay, unlisted debenture meaning it's not available in the Colombo Stock Exchange to be easily traded. Okay, so because of that, there can be certain difficulties for you to get out of the debenture. Or let's assume if it's a listed debenture itself, what will happen is you need to have buyers who are willing to buy this particular debenture. Let's see, there's a spike in the credit risk of that company. They have defaulted some other bank loan. Okay, and that goes in the newspaper. So if you are trying to get rid of this debenture, the potential investor knows this information. He would say, no, it's a risky asset, I'm not going to buy it. Again, that's going to impact on your liquidity levels. So the higher liquidity is available for this particular instrument. And information cost. If you think about a treasury bond, you know, issued by the government, there is security in it. You don't need to have additional research on this. Okay, but here some company called X has issued this debenture. If you are the investor, you will need to assess the repayment capacity, what the company is doing, whether the company is functioning properly, who are the directors. You need all these information. So which of the security has a higher information cost? The debenture issued by an unknown or a less known party. So due to all these factors, you can see that particular asset or the debenture issued by X company having a higher interest rate than the government issued security, even though both of them have the same maturity period. Both of them are going to mature at the end of 5 years. But the risk level of that security is different. Because of that, the interest rate given to these two securities are also different. I hope you got that. Okay. What about term structure of interest rate? Now, earlier what we saw was the risk structure. The name itself tells you the risk of the asset or the security will be the determining factor or the differentiating factor between the difference in the interest rate. Here, term structure. This concept is going to tell you why securities, even though they have the same risk and the liquidity characteristics, they are going to have different interest rate. And the reason is that these two securities are having a difference in terms of their maturity period. So if you're looking at this example, we are comparing both these securities are treasury bonds, but One is a 5-year treasury bond, one is a 10-year treasury bond. So because why are these two having a different interest rate? Because the maturity period is different. That's what we are going to learn here. Term to maturity is the length of time until principal amount borrowed has to be paid back or becomes payable. This concept can be studied by plotting different interest rate against terms to maturity, which ideally becomes the yield curve. Now understand this fact. Term structure of interest rate can be graphically represented. Okay. Why it can be graphically represented? We are looking at interest rates differences with changing maturity. Okay, this is the term structure. So both these variables can be quantitatively indicated, but risk structure, we are going to see interest rate and the changing risk levels. It becomes different for us to graphically show. Because this can be graphically indicated, the graph becomes yield curve. Okay. So what is a yield curve? Interest rate for differing maturities being plotted in one diagram. It shows the relationship between yields of securities with different lengths of time. So you will be wondering, why am I doing all this? Why am I going to plot it in a diagram? Look at this curve. What is it going to show me? Now, this yield curve is a very, very important instrument for you to understand the future of the instruments, future of these particular instruments, or even the future expectation of other investors in the market. We are going to learn that. Okay. So now once you draw up a yield curve, you can see this yield curve can take one of 4 types. It can be upward sloping yield curve, which is the most common one. It can be a downward sloping yield curve. What do you mean by downward sloping? Short-term rates are high and long-term rates are low. This is what a downward yield curve will tell you. Or it can be a flat yield curve. Or it can be a humped or a bell-shaped curve. So something like this. So there are 4 particular types, and each of these 4 is going to have some kind of an indication for you. Okay. So upward sloping yield curve, you can see the diagram over here. This is the more normal one. This is the most steeper yield curve. So here you can see, why do you call it steeper? The change is very drastic. At the beginning, the interest rate is at a low level. Yes, both are increasing, but here in the steeper diagram, the increase is very drastic. Upward sloping yield curve, which is the most common type of a yield curve, is called also as the positively sloped yield curve. Remember the names, because sometimes in the paper they could reword it, they could change the wordings. You should be aware about it. Our positively or a upward sloping yield curve will tell investors that the market is indicating or market is expecting that the future of this particular economy is going to have a better growth, and therefore there can be an inflationary situation in the market. Okay, when there is market growth or economic growth, market activities are going to be high. Okay, the investment requirement is going to be high. The demand for loanable funds or demand for money is going to be high, and because of that, the interest rate will also move upwards, and therefore the future, the long term, will have a higher rate, whereas the short term has a lower rate. Now we are going to look at the downward sloping or inverted yield curve. Inverted yield curve indicates that when the maturity is increasing, the interest rate is going to be very, very low. Now, practically, for you to see such a situation in the market is going to be very one-off, or when some really crisis has happened in the market is when you would see something like this. Why? A downward sloping yield curve is going to tell you, look here, the future of this economy is not good. They are going to enter into a recession, or it's going to be a very slow economic growth. There is going to be a deflationary impact or very low levels of inflation in the market, indicating that the future longer term securities are going to have low interest rate. They're not willing to invest in such long term assets because in the long term situation is going to get bad. Therefore, short term interest rates are going to be higher, whereas long term interest rates are going to be low. Then you have flat yield curve. You will be wondering, when will a flat situation happen like this? Irrespective of the tenor, all the interest rates are going to be the same. This will happen when the future is not certain, when the investors or the market participants is unable to make a decision on what the future economic growth is going to be or the future inflation situation is going to be. So when there is an uncertainty in the market, you could expect a flat yield curve. All right. Then you have humped or bell-shaped yield curve. This is a variant of the flat yield curve where it shows that the intermediate period, there's going to be a spike in the interest rate, a very short-lived spike, and in the long term, interest rates are going to be again back to the short-term levels. See the difference? Just the intermediate term of the security is going to have a higher interest rate than the short and the long term. Now, what I want you to know in these four types is, know the four types, know the names of the four types clearly, understand what each of these is trying to tell you, and always remember the short-term interest rate and the long-term interest rate, how it's going to act. In an upward sloping curve, the long-term interest rate is going to be higher than the short-term. In a downward sloping yield curve, the long-term interest rate is going to be lower than the short-term. In a flat yield curve, all are equal. In a humped yield curve, what's going to happen? There is an intermediate term. Securities are going to have a higher interest rate than the short and the long term. Just remember those. Just to show you practically, this is the yield curves taken from the US market. So there you can see, if you look at this scenario over here, look at the date in 2000, they are having it's a rather inverted curve. Why a inverted curve at this particular time? this was when the US market experienced the collapse of the pressure of Enron issues, the dot-com bust, as what they call. Like there were issues coming up from Enron, eventually the collapse of Enron. So that period of time where they're expecting a recessionary impact to occur, you could see a inverted yield curve or a downward sloping yield curve. Let's move to here, this one, 2007. You know what time period that was? That was the time during the, or just entering into the financial crisis period. So there was an uncertainty in the market. You could see that with the relatively flat yield curve. The interest rates are not all exactly equal, but very close. So that kind of a situation shows that there is some level of uncertainty in the market. The market is unable to expect what's going to happen. Is there any question? They are unable to expect what the future holds. So that kind of uncertainty is reflected here. Look over here, the very first one. This one is during 2010, when the economy is in the recovery stages after the global financial crisis. There you can see they are expecting the economy to be better in the future. Therefore, the yield curve being positively sloped. They are expecting economy growth to set into the market, and therefore the yield curve being upward sloping. Just for you to practically see this in this in the context, so you understand that even though this is theory, you could easily apply in the practical world and get the necessary indications from the market. Now, in risk structure, we understood what the risk structure was, and we had reasons why these differing risks were. What there is a difference between the interest rate. Yes, you call it the risk structure of interest rate. What is this difference caused by? Now we are going to see why the term structure of theory happens, or why this difference in maturity, difference in interest rate across the maturities happen. Okay, so there we have theories of term structure of interest rate. These four theories are going to explain to you why this yield curve is taking different shapes. The four theories that explains the observed shape. Now each of these will have a explanation as to why this situation occurs. Okay, so the very first one we have is the expectations, or the pure expectations theory. Let's first go through the slide and then let me explain it to you. All right, expectation theory of term structure is mainly advocating this. What is that? The interest rate for a long-term security. If you take this scenario, interest rate for a long-term security, 7-year security, say 10-year. Will equal to the average of short-term interest rates that is expected to occur over the life of the long-term security. Now, don't get confused. Let me explain it to you. What this expectation theory says is, look here, the interest rate of a 10-year security equals to the average interest rate of all securities within that 10-year period. So you have 1 month, 3 month, the average of all these instruments, the average of the interest rate of all these instruments will equal to the interest rate of this particular instrument or the 10-year instrument. Let's see the example. If the investors expect that the short-term interest rate will be on average 10% for the coming 5 years, we are talking about the average here, then you expect that a 5-year security to have an interest rate of 5. Simple as that. If I have to graphically show it to you, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm expecting a 5-year instrument to have 10% as the interest rate. This 10%, how does it come? 5 years, you take interest rate of a 1-year security, interest rate of a 2-year security, 3-year, 4-year, 5-year. When you average it out, the short-term interest rate of these tenors will get you the interest rate of this 5th year, or the short-term interest rate between that time period. All right. So this essentially tells you that there is a very strong relationship between the long and the short-term interest rate. This I want you to highlight, because not every theory says this. So as per expectations theory, it says, look here, the short-term interest rate is very, very important or has a strong relationship to the long-term interest rate. Why? Because the interest rate of that long-term security depends on the average of that short-term interest rates that comes to that 5 years. Over the 5 years, the short-term interest rate average is that interest rate of that 5th year instrument. Okay. So expectation theory says why term structure changes in the following way. So it says if the yield curve is upward sloping, the expectation theory suggests the short-term interest rates are expected to rise in the future, and therefore the average of future short-term interest rate is expected to increase and be higher than the current short-term rates. And because of this is why the yield curve is upward sloping. Why is it? Now, how is this theory justifying a downward sloping in the yield curve? They say the average of future short-term interest rate is expected to be lower than the current short-term rate, implying that the short-term interest rates are expected to fall on average in the future. Let's see the other one. When the yield curve is flat, the expectation theory suggests that the short-term interest rates are not expected to change on average in the future. And the final one is how does it explain a humped or the yield curve theory? The theory says that short-term interest rates are expected to rise on average, but in the immediate future only. Now, let me show it to you graphically. So, let's draw up clearly. Okay. Now, expectation theory, what did it say? It said that if I'm looking at a 5-year instrument, it depended on the short-term instruments of all these periods. The average of all these is what is reflected here. Okay. So for a curve to be upward sloping, what does the theory says? The theory suggests that short-term interest rates are expected to rise in the future. So the short-term interest rates is expected to rise in the future, and therefore the average of this is going to increase, and as a result of this, the long-term interest rates are going to be high as well. In this situation, average of short-term rates are expected to be higher than the current short-term rate. And because of that, you have a upward sloping yield curve. Now let's see the downward sloping yield curve. The average of future short-term interest rate is expected to be lower than the current short-term rate. So a scenario as this. An inverted scenario. Therefore, let's say the current is at 5. If you take the average, now this is at 4, 3, let's say 2, 2.5, 2. So if you take the average of this, we are saying average of this is the interest rate of this particular asset. So let's say it's coming at 2. It shows that the short-term interest rates are declining than the current short-term rate. So that is what is shown that is what is advocated, or to justify the yield curve being inverted from a point of view of the expectations theory. Okay. Now yield curve being flat, simply they're saying there is the expectation that the short-term interest rate in the future is going to have no change. And because of that, average is going to be pretty much similar. And therefore, even the long-term instrument is going to have the same interest rate. A humped yield curve, it's going to have a rather spike in the short-term interest rate, but in the medium term. In the intermediate term only. All the other, in the short and the long term, compared to these two, short and the long term, the intermediate time is going to have a spike. So intermediate time is going to have a spike than the current short-term rate is what is indicated by the expectations theory. Now we move to the liquidity premium theory. Now, liquidity premium theory is an extension of the expectations theory. So, it's going to have the same beliefs of the expectations theory. The same scenario which says a strong relationship is going to get continued here as well. They believe the same thing, but it's going to be an extension. Let's see what that is. Expectations theory told us that the interest rate on a long-term bond will equal an average of short-term interest rate expected. So that is what expectations theory told us. But as per liquidity premium, what does it say? Look here, it doesn't stop there. There is something else. In addition to that, there is something called a liquidity premium or term premium that is also important in deciding the yield curve shape. So that is what is explained here. So the added component is liquidity premium. So both these together decides the shape of it. Now, what is this liquidity premium? Think about this scenario. You and I, we are trying, someone is coming to market a instrument which is a 5 years. Okay. And he's telling us, okay, look here, this 5-year instrument has an interest rate of 10%. And why have they priced it at 10%? Because the average of all the short-term interest rate comes at 10%, and therefore it's priced at 10 based on the expectations theory. And now you're saying, okay, average of all the short-term interest rates, true, but I am going to lose something. I'm going to lose liquidity, or because I'm going to block my asset for 5 years, I'm going to be exposed to interest rate risk, and the term is also higher. Therefore, I'm going to be exposed to it for a very longer period. There is someone who has a 2-year bond. I'm having a 5-year bond. I'm exposed to higher interest rate than the other person who holds a 2-year bond. Okay. How am I going to get compensated for that? And that is why the liquidity premium has been added. Investors by default, you and I, if we are given two securities, if someone is coming to tell you, okay, I have 5 million and there is an instrument which is 2 years, another instrument which is 5 years, interest rate is, let's say, pretty much the same, 5 and 5%. I will obviously go for the 2-year instrument. Why? Shorter term, I get the same return. I'm not exposed to any additional risk. In that additional 3 years, I don't know what will happen. Okay. So for me to be attracted towards that long-term security, there need to be a higher interest rate. Am I correct? So if there is a higher interest rate, let's say 2-year is at 5% and the 5-year is at 10%. So double, or the 5-year is at 15%. Thrice. Now I am attracted. I'm thinking, am I willing to take that risk and go for that high return? I am now attracted. There is some difference which is making me think to move towards the long-term instrument. That is what is shown in the liquidity premium. It's more of a practical theory. So investors tend to prefer shorter term bonds. Why? Because these bonds bear less interest rate risk. Hence, investors must be offered a liquidity premium to induce them to hold longer term bonds. In simple, this theory modifies the expectation theory by adding a positive liquidity premium to the equation that describes the relationship between the long and the short term interest rate. Now, here there is a key word. This word called positive. Can liquidity premium be negative? No. When the interest term, when the maturity is longer, you have to give a higher liquidity premium. So it has to be always increasing. It cannot be decreasing. Okay, that's why I have used the term positive liquidity premium. Now, in this diagram here, for convenience purposes, I have used a flat yield curve. Okay, we will see how the yield curve is going to change when there is a liquidity premium added on. But just for your purposes, for you to understand easily, you can see here. I have taken a flat yield curve, and because now in the liquidity premium theory, this is an extension. So based on the expectation theory, I'm adding on something called liquidity premium. So that liquidity premium is going to be increasing with the maturity. Now, what is my new yield curve? Earlier it was a flat yield curve. Now it's a positively sloping yield curve. Just for you to understand the difference. Let's go to this diagram. Then you can see here you can, no, this is EH is the yield curve advocated by the expectation hypothesis. That's why there is a H there. LPH is the yield curve advocated by the liquidity premium hypothesis. So you can see the how there is a shift happening in the yield curve. So liquidity premium theory is explaining the following to us. Let's see what those are. Interest rates on bonds of different maturities tend to move together over time. What they are saying is, if the interest rate, copy of this, let's go to the slide. What the theory suggests is that interest rate on bonds with differing maturity tend to move together over time, which means if the 5-year interest rate increases further, currently it's at this point, if it increases even higher, then definitely the 10-year bond also has to increase. 5-year bond also, 15-year bond also has to increase. And this increase has to move along. Why? When there is a compensation given here and this is increased, this also has to roll on. You have to attract. It can't be, the 5-year can't have a higher interest rate and the 10-year can't have a low interest rate. Liquidity premium has to be added on. Therefore, all the interest rate across the different maturity move together over time. And the last one is, yield curve usually slope upwards, more upward sloping than predicted by the expectations theory. Now let me explain that as well. First, let's read through this. With the additional boost of a positive liquidity premium, long-term interest rate will be substantially higher than the current short-term rates, and therefore the yield curve will have a positively steeper upward sloping curve. However, in the situation of an inward yield curve, where when the liquidity premium is added to the average of the expected short-term rate, the resulting long-term rate will be lower than the current short-term interest rate. See over here, even though there is a premium added on, still the drop is there. The drop is available. Okay, but now here the decrease or the change is a bit has narrowed, you could say. Earlier the difference was very drastic. Now the difference has come somehow narrowed. But usually this theory justifies that yield curves are usually upward. Why? Now they say there has to be additional liquidity premium. So when there is a liquidity premium, more interest being added towards buying a long-term interest rate. Therefore, the curve has to be upward sloping. So their justification is mainly towards the upward sloping curve other than the other three types. Okay. Liquidity premium is always positive and grows as the term to maturity increases. This is very, very important. If you can highlight that. Therefore, yield curve implied by the liquidity premium theory is always above the yield curve implied by the expectation theory, and has a steeper slope because of the difference. Okay, always it's above the expectations, the yield curve drawn as per expectations theory. You have to remember that. Now we move to the third theory, market segmentation theory. Let's have a read on that. As the name suggests, the market segmentation theory suggests that market for different maturity bonds is as completely separate and segmented. Now you can see just the first line itself threatens the biggest belief that was in the expectations theory and the liquidity premium theory. Liquidity premium theory and let's go to expectations theory says there is a strong relationship between the long and the short term interest rate. Liquidity premium theory also says that why liquidity premium is an extension of the expectation theory, and you can see here over time all these increase together. Liquidity premium also believes that. But market segmentation theory says, look here, market for different maturity bonds. The bonds with different maturity is different, it's a different market. Therefore, that is completely separate and it is segmented. Therefore, yield curve is determined by the interaction of supply and demand for securities at or near a particular maturity. So what is the market segmentation theory suggesting? That each maturity, if we take this as 5-year, 10-year and 15-year, the market segmentation theory says, look here, this is a separate market. This is a market for 5-year security. This is a market for 10-year security. This is a market for 15-year security. These three are completely separate and segmented. The interest rate for that security comes from the demand and supply in that market or for that security. Okay, it doesn't depend on anything else. According to the market segmentation theory, interest rate for different maturities are determined independently of one another. So this is the biggest difference when it comes to this theory. The interest rate for short-term securities is determined by the supply and demand for short-term funds. Highlight these keywords. Long-term interest rates are those that equate the sums that investors wish to lend long-term with the amounts borrowers are seeking on a long-term basis. So pretty much the short-term market is very much more different, and the supply and the demand forces are also independent of each other. That's what the market segmentation theory is highlighting to you. Key assumption in the market segmentation theory is that the expected return or the yield from holding a bond of one maturity has no effect on the demand for a bond of another maturity. this theory of the term structure is the opposite of the expectations theory, which assumes a strong relationship between long and short-term rates. This theory suggests that the investors have strong preferences for bonds of one maturity and not for another. So they will be concerned with the expected returns only for the bonds of the maturity they prefer. These might occur because they might have a particular holding period in mind. They're keen in that particular maturity, so they are not worried about what all the other maturity instruments are giving you. I think I have an example for that in the note. If you have a particular maturity in mind, then what this theory says is justifiable. So, for example, if you take people who have a short holding period would prefer short-term bonds. So, if you want to invest in an instrument, if you're looking for something short-term, your holding period, preferred holding period is short-term, then you will definitely look for a short-term bond. Okay? If your preference is towards the long-term, you're going to look at a short-term tenor. Long-term tenor. A short-term bond is not going to change your mind. Okay? But if you're saving to buy a house in 5 years' time, your desired holding period is going to be, might be longer, and you would want to hold a long-term bond. So here what I'm trying to tell you is, assume you want to buy a house in 5 years' time. What you're going to look for is a saving product where you can keep saving till the maturity hits 5 years. You are not going to hold the instrument in a 10-year bond. Okay? But if your preference is to buy an immediate laptop or to buy an immediate phone, which is very 1 or less term, then definitely you are not going to be worried about what a 5-year bond is going to give you. Even though the rate is lucrative, your mind is fixed on the tenor. Because of that, there is no any slippages between the markets, between the tenors. And that is why this theory suggests that each maturity is in a different or a very segmented bubble. Okay? So this is because the theory views the market. Sorry. The key assumption is what we saw. This theory suggests that investors have strong preferences for bonds of one maturity and not for another. And therefore, they will not slip into the other maturity because they already have a particular holding period in mind with them. Unlike earlier theories, the market segmentation theory doesn't explain why interest rate on bonds of different maturities move together. Now, they are unable to say that. Why? Because this theory is telling you, look here, each maturity is in a different bucket or in a different segmented market. Therefore, what happens in one market is not going to affect the other one. So, this theory doesn't say that all the interest rate, if the interest rate in the 3-year market increases, it says it will not have an impact on the 5-year market. But liquidity premium theory says, look here, if the 3-year bond interest rate increases, 5-year also has to increase. Why? You have to compensate for the liquidity premium. Okay? Why is this market segmentation theory not explaining that? Because the theory views the market for bonds of different maturity as completely segmented. So there is no reason for a rise in interest rate of one maturity, in a bond of one maturity to affect the interest rate on a bond of another maturity. Okay, but this theory can explain why yield curves are usually upward sloping. The demand for long-term bonds are relatively lower than short-term bonds. We can agree with that. Remember the first, when we looked at the liquidity premium theory, we understood people usually prefer short-term securities. They are exposed to less interest rate risk. So similar is being highlighted here. The demand for a long-term bond is very low than short-term bonds. Because the demand is low for such long-term bonds, the prices of those bonds are also low. Demand being low, because of that, the prices are also being less. When the price is low, you have to attract them with a higher interest rate. And due to that, the interest rate of long-term bonds are higher than the short-term bonds. Now, this is very, very important, because this way of justifying is specific for the market segmented theory. Okay, not for the other theories. So I want you to remember or understand why or how market segmentation theory justifies the yield curve being upward sloping. How are they doing that? They're saying, look here, long-term bonds are not much preferred by investors. Okay? And because of that, the demand for long-term bonds is going to be lower than the short-term bonds. Due to this reason, the long-term bond is going to have lower prices. So remember, when price is low, interest is high, the inverse relationship, that itself would tell you the long-term bonds will hence have a higher interest rate. Thus, the yield curve to be upward sloping. All right. The final theory which justifies these shapes and all these relationship between the short and the long term is the preferred habitat theory. Now, this is a more of a newer version where they have linked liquidity premium and the market segmentation theory. Now remember, liquidity premium theory is an extension of the expected theory, expectations theory. Market segmentation theory is a standalone theory which tells you each maturity is different, unrelated. Fourth one, the preferred habitat theory is telling you, or it's being closely related to the market segmentation theory, yes, but it also has the liquidity premium involved as well. So let's see how this theory justifies that. Now once mic is on, mute it, okay. So the key assumption in a preferred habitat theory is that this theory assumes investors have a preference for securities of one maturity over another. A particular maturity or the preferred habitat in which they prefer to invest. Therefore, the investors will be willing to buy bonds that don't have that preferred maturity or with a higher or shorter if they are earning a different return. Do you get what I'm saying? Now, in the market segmentation theory, we said, look here, people have one kind of a maturity in mind. Therefore, they will only focus in that market. They're not going to worry about what's happening in any other market. Okay, so if I need to buy a house in 5 years, I'm going to save money or invest my saving in a 5-year bond. Why? In 5 years it will mature and I will have money to pay to get my house. Okay. Now preferred habitat theory says, look here, yes, that's good, but if this person who is only focused in this 5-year tenor learns that the 10-year bond is giving me a very much higher return, then they are willing to move out of their preferred maturity. Okay, so when there is a premium being offered, then the person is willing to move out from the maturity period that they had in mind. As investors are likely to prefer the habitat of short-term bonds over the long-term bonds. Again, we saw this in the liquidity preference theory and the market segmentation theory, and again here. It says that people prefer by default to go for a short-term bond, because of a less interest rate risk exposure. Because of that, for a person to go towards a long-term bond market, they need to have higher returns. This leads to the same assumption by the liquidity premium theory that with a term premium, the yield rises with maturity. So again, the preferred habitat theory also says that yield curves are usually upward sloping curves. Okay. Now, I have a small summary of all these 4 theories, but first of all, I want you to understand these 4 theories, understand what each of these theories tell you, and note down those differences. Because when I'm explaining itself, you could have got an indication where you can see expectation theory was the only theory which had justification for all 4 shapes. The other 3 theories said usually the market or the yield curve is upward sloping. They can only justify a upward sloping curve. Then there was a theory which said that interest rate of all maturities or the different maturities didn't move together over time. Some said yes, they moved together over time. So know those differences. Know how each theory justifies that the yield curve is upward sloping. Those are the areas that they can test for. Okay. Now we are going to look at something called the significance or the users of the yield curve. We are at the final few stages and we will focus on that. So yield curve can be used to assess the general expectation of the borrowers and the lenders about future interest rate. So that we saw when we were discussing this bit of the lecture. Over here, upward, downward, flat and bell-shaped or the humped, we saw that each of these shapes gave some kind of an indication of what the borrowers and the lenders thought about the market. A normal upward sloping yield curve means long-term securities have a higher yield. An inward curve shows that the short-term securities have a higher yield. Now, these shows that people, what kind of a expectation they had about the future, whether the future long-term rates are higher or lower. The expectation reflected that, and because of that, you can get a market indication of what the other borrowers thought. Now, if you are of the view that in the future market is going to pick up, but if you see the yield curve and see that the yield curve is a downward sloping curve, or you don't even have to see the yield curve. If you see in the market that a short-term security is having a higher interest rate, than a long-term security, that should indicate you, or that should ring a bell in you saying, the long term is having a very small interest rate or very low interest rate, but the short term product is having a higher interest rate. So even though I expect that in the future market is going to pick up, other people might be having some expectation that the economic growth is going to have an impact. Economic growth is going to be economy is going to move into a recession. Okay, so that expectation is shown to us, shown to a decision maker through the yield curve. Okay, other one is investors can use the yield curve to identify overpriced security and underpriced security. Now, this is very, very important. Why? Even in an MCQ, they can draw up, give you a yield curve, show where the assets, where this particular security has this particular interest rate. So, do you assume that this security is underpriced or overpriced? That kind of a question. So, understand this particular point. Now, if the security's interest rate is above the yield curve, you have the yield curve, but in the market there is this particular security. This security is giving you interest rate which is above the yield curve. That means this particular security is underpriced. Let me draw it to you. Okay. And 3 tenors over here. Let's say 5 year, 10 year and 15 years. Now this is the yield curve. All right. So interest, and here you have tenor. Okay. Now in this market yield curve, you have a security which has a tenor of 10 years, but that particular security is giving you, let's assume 10%. Whereas according to the yield curve, you should ideally be getting somewhere around 7%. Okay. Remember, when interest rate is high, price is low. The inverse relationship. Ideally, a product which should have 7% now has a higher interest rate. That should tell you that this particular security is having a low price than this 7% security. So, the security that we are talking about is a underpriced security. That's how you can find it. Similarly, if the security's interest rate lies below the yield curve, that means the security is overpriced. Same scenario, but we're looking at a 5-year bond. Let's assume the 5-year average here. 5-year average is 5%. Okay. But there is a security in the market. There is some company has issued a bond, and that bond is giving you an interest rate of 3%. Okay. Ideally, the market is willing to give you 5, but here the interest rate is low. So when the interest rate is low, price is high. So price of this particular debenture is higher than other 5-year products in the market. So you know that this particular debenture is an overpriced security. So when you are going to invest in the market, you will think twice whether you are willing to buy a overpriced asset. You have to refrain from buying overpriced asset, and you should sell overpriced asset. It's favorable for you. But if it's an underpriced asset, you should buy underpriced asset and not sell an underpriced asset until the market corrects for itself. So remember those two. If the yield curve is below, if the securities interest rate is below the yield curve, overpriced, above the yield curve, underpriced. Remember, this is the justification for you to think. When the interest rate is high, price is low. Therefore, a higher interest rate debenture for the same tenor will have a low price, allowing you to buy at a much lower price than the other market participants. Okay, that is what is highlighted here. Third one is, this yield curve will help in the business of financial intermediation. Now, who does this business of financial intermediation? Bankers. Financial intermediaries who borrow funds by selling short-term deposits and lend funds using long-term loans. Okay, so if there is assume, I'm unable to erase all this. Let's assume a upward sloping curve like this, which will tell you that long-term interest rate is higher than the short-term interest rate. Okay, so if you are a bank, what is your role? You buy short-term, you borrow money on short-term basis and lend money on long-term basis. So your borrowing cost is going to be low than the rate that you are going to lend. So for a bank, a upward sloping curve will indicate you a profitable scenario. Okay. Flat or downward curve will tell you that you are going to have a hit in your profits. Why? When the yield curve is sloping as this, your short-term products is going to have a higher cost. You have to give high fixed deposit rates and get your deposits. But when you are lending, you can't give at high rates. You have to give at low rates. Market is moving towards that. Because of that, you as a financial intermediary is going to face a decreased profit situation. Okay. This yield curve helps borrowers and investors to know what the market is expecting, identify securities underpriced or overpriced, and it also helps bankers or any other financial intermediary to know on how their business is going to be. Okay. Then we have issuers can also identify or use the yield curve to price their assets. Why am I saying this as a benefit? Now remember the earlier overpriced and the underpriced scenario. Okay. So if you are an issuer, a new issuer, and you know that according to the yield curve, a 10-year bond should have 7% interest rate. You know, if you are going to price your instrument at 10%, which has the same maturity, it's going to be underpriced. The demand is going to be very high. Okay. But you know, you shouldn't definitely give it at a decreased price. Why? Then the demand is going to be low. So for the issuer, they can decide on what interest rate or what prices that they have to issue in the market. So if the issuer is a very well-known issuer who can abide by the market interest rate itself. They could offer the same market rate and go ahead. But if you are an issuer who has certain issues in the company, not so good, therefore you have to compensate with a higher interest rate and thus give at a low price to attract more investors to buy your security. So this guideline is given to issuers through the yield curve. And then finally, we have a strategy that the investors can use. Let's see what that is. Investors use the yield curve for a strategy known as riding the yield curve. Let's see what that is. This is a trading strategy that involves buying a long-term bond with a maturity date longer than the desired investment horizon. So if your desired investment horizon is 6 months, you buy an instrument which has a maturity of 9 months. Okay. And selling it before it matures to a profit from the declining yield that occurs over the life of a bond. Investors hope to achieve capital gains by employing this strategy. So using this strategy, what you're trying to do is you're trying to earn a capital gain in the market. Okay. You are willing to, your investment horizon is 6 months. Okay. You want to invest in a product which will mature in 6 months. That is your goal. But you go and invest in an instrument which is at 9 months. Okay. So 9 months instrument is at 1.5%. Whereas a 6 months will only get you 1.25. Now, when the remaining terms to maturity keeps decreasing, you know interest rate is going to come down. And you can sell it off at this point. So, when the 6 months is over, you're not going to wait till the 9 months. You're not going to wait till the maturity period. When you invest in a 9-month instrument, when your preferred tenor is reached, when you have held it for 6 months, you sell at that point. And because you sell it before it matures, you are able to sell it at a profit. Your interest rate is low, which means price is high. And therefore, you will end up in a capital gain or higher price. So this is what is called the yield, riding the yield curve strategy. I hope it's clear for you. Your investment horizon is a 6 months investment horizon. Okay. But you go and buy an instrument which is longer than your desired investment horizon. So something like a 9 months. Okay. And now you have invested in a 9-month, let's say a commercial paper, and you're holding it. Okay. Now 6 months have gone. There is another 3 months for it to mature. What are you going to do now? You're going to sell at the end of the 6 months. Before it's maturing, you're going to sell. And that means time to maturity is you have 3 more months to mature. If you sell at this point, because of the low interest rate, you can sell at a higher price. Okay, low interest, high price. And thus, investors will get a capital gain out of this strategy. So this is why you call the riding the yield curve. You move along the yield curve to get a profit. Okay. So with that, we'll wind up the lesson for today. And we will start the next class from this point onwards, where the interest rate can be negative, and then we will move into a certain theory relating to the stock market. And let's see whether we could move into the money market topic as well. All right. So with that, we will wind up today's lectures. What I would ideally want you to do is, if you have time, go through these theories and try to identify the differences. I will give you a summary, yes, but if you are able to identify the differences on your own, you will definitely remember those differences. Okay, so try to do that during this week, and we'll meet again next week for the rest of the lesson. All right, thank you so much for listening.